My brother is 2 years older, and we've probably spent tens of thousands of hours and then some in the woods together. Whether it was building forts or BMX tracks or camping or hunting, we've traveled all across the US, exploring every area we can and doing whatever else since 2016. We try to do so whenever we get the time off. I feel like adding this is important because there's genuinely nothing I wouldn't do or fear when I have him by my side. This time was different though, and we both felt it. We've had our fair share of adventures and stories to tell of all sorts, but this one has been a lingering stain on my memory. We are both in our mid-20s, and it was around 2019. This was probably my 5th time hunting in this area, and the first time I brought my brother along with me. It was a large forested area of public land that had a few country roads which were basically 2 tracks that stretched for miles throughout the area. We made the trip up in my truck with our tents. 3 in total, 1 for each of us and another to change in and keep our gear in. Without making this long-winded, we set up camp a couple of miles from the truck, which we'd driven for quite a few miles throughout these winding trails. We were now basically in the middle of nowhere. The nearest main road was probably 8 to 10 miles away. We arrived late at night to the camping area and set up camp. We quickly fell asleep after all the work we'd done that day. We spent the next day scouting and tracking, then made back to camp for the night. We cooked, then ate, and had some beers as well. The night was still early, but we'd had quite a long day, and decided to head off for some rest. Everything up until this point had been pretty normal, when suddenly I was awoken to something smacking against my tent. I heard my brother's voice calling out my name. I knew something was off. I called back to him, and immediately he unzipped my tent and made his way inside. I could tell that he was disturbed. When I went to ask him what was wrong, he immediately grabbed my shoulder and told me to be quiet. The sun wasn't even up yet. I think it was around 4:30 or so. We sat in my tent, and what we heard still confuses me to this day. I can only explain it as someone making wail sounds of different tones, an extremely loud noise that I could feel throughout my body. It would come and go, and there would only be a few seconds of silence in between. It started to vary from high-pitched squeals to everything in between. Very low sounds that literally felt like it made me shake with the reverb. I regrettably didn't think to grab my phone or record anything that was going on, because what I was hearing didn't seem real. In the moment, I was struck by the sound. It went on until daylight started to break, I believe. It was about an hour or so, but I'm not really sure. Neither of us spoke the whole time. It felt like I could feel this ominous energy around me, almost like my body was covered in white noise, if that makes any sense. It wasn't even minutes after the sound stopped that it started to rain. It was one of the craziest thunderstorms I'd ever seen while I was camping. The forecast hadn't predicted or accounted for any rain on the days we were going to be there prior to planning out the trip. All the stakes for the tent with our gear were completely ripped out of the ground, and both of our tents had multiple stakes ripped out as well. We'd driven those things into the ground with an axe, so it would have taken some real force to unearth every single one. My brother dismisses it and won't even talk about it, saying it must have been some machinery being dragged or something. We both share the same feeling of fear and dread, though. It just seems odd. It was in the middle of the night, and we were so far removed from any nearby communities or industry to hear or experience this type of occurrence. This happened to me during spring break, back in the mid-90s when I was still attending college. At the time, I lived with my parents in a small community, just outside of Seattle, Washington. My parents were on vacation in Florida, so I had the house all to myself. Here in Washington State, especially around the Seattle area, we get a lot of rain. This night was no different, really. My parents' house was a massive 3-story ranch-style home that was originally built during the 1940s. At night, you could hear the creak and groan of all the old wooden boards. My father had spent a lot of money replacing some of the old infrastructure when he'd bought the place back in 1978, but the creaking never really went away. Not completely, at least. It used to really frighten me as a kid, but eventually I got used to it. That night, I was sitting on the couch watching some TV in the living room. Behind the couch was a large glass wall of sorts, lined with curtains and with a sliding door that went into a screened-in pool area. I nearly dozed off on the couch after a while, but was immediately startled back awake by a loud noise that sounded like something had just slammed into the glass behind me. With the storm still raging outside, I figured the wind may have knocked something on the pool deck into the small glass wall. I got out to investigate. As I approached the curtains, I immediately felt my stomach drop. It was as if my body was telling me I was in some kind of danger. I paused and tried my best to calm myself. I threw back the curtains, only to find that there was nothing there. There was only the visage of the empty pool reflecting the night sky. As the rain trickled down through the overhead screening, I exhaled a sigh of relief and decided to flip on the outside light to make sure the storm hadn't knocked anything over. The light switch was right next to me, since I was at the far end of the wall. As soon as I flipped on the lights, my eyes were quickly averted by a horrifying sight. 2 figures dressed in dark hooded ponchos, standing at the opposite end of the pool deck. They were holding hands as the rain continued to come down around them. I was frozen in place, not sure what I was supposed to do or what I was really seeing here. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. And time itself seemed to slow down as the figure that was closest to the edge of the pool broke off from the other and started power walking toward the glass. The fear within me became so unbearable that I'm not ashamed to admit I let out a rather pathetic yelp as I retreated back into the living room. I slowly backed away from the curtains as the dark hooded silhouette came into view and made its way towards the thing that was mounted on the adjacent wall. I saw the figure throw something and heard the sound of glass shattering. The light went out, immediately followed by me turning and running into the garage, which was located down a hallway that was directly behind me. Now, I have to pause here and explain that both my parents were incredibly anti-firearm. In fact, they both met at a gun control protest in the early 1970s. Needless to say, there were absolutely no firearms in the house I could defend myself with. The best I could do was grab one of my dad's golf clubs from the garage. I then made my way to the second-floor guest bedroom, which overlooked the pool area. I grabbed the cordless phone off the nightstand and immediately dialed 911. I frantically explained to the dispatch what was happening. At the same time, I was trying to look out the bedroom window to see if the intruders were still prowling the pool area. Unfortunately, I couldn't make out anything because of the pelting rain. Dispatch told me that units were on their way, and I should remain inside the house until they get there. I then heard something that made my heart really stop. I honestly can't remember if I hung up on dispatch or if I accidentally dropped the phone. All I do remember is gripping the golf club tightly in my hands as I kept my eyes on the bedroom door. As I stated earlier, the house can be very creaky at times, especially when you're walking up the stairs. I heard the distinct sound of someone making their way up those creaky steps. I backed away as I heard the footsteps emerge into the hallway just outside the door. It wasn't long before the doorknob began to rattle. It was soft at first, but became more erratic and violent. Then there was the pounding that shook the entire door. I braced myself for whoever was on the other side to break through. The pounding then turned into loud thuds, as if the person on the other side was putting their entire weight into taking the door down. All of the doors in my parents' house were entirely made out of oak, and all very thick all the way through. After about 5 minutes, I heard a second pair of footsteps quickly rushing up the stairs. Soon after, I heard a woman's voice whispering harshly, "I see cops outside. We need to go now!" 2 sets of footsteps then frantically descended the stairs, went across the tile floor of the living room, and I assume exited through the pool area. Moments later, I heard an audible shouting over the rain. When I looked out the bedroom window again, I saw 2 flashlight beams pointing in the same direction. The heavy rain and the screened structure prevented me from seeing exactly what was going on, but I'm guessing the intruders were surrendering to a couple of police officers. The doorbell rang, followed by someone identifying themselves as law enforcement. I put down the golf club and quickly went to the front door, making sure to look through the people to confirm before opening. I explained to the officer that I was the one who had called, and I was quite relieved to discover that both of the assailants had been arrested in the backyard. I was then asked to stay on the front porch while a couple of officers searched through the home. While I was waiting, I saw the 2 people being placed in the back of a squad car that was parked out in the street. Although I could not make out any of their features, I could tell that one of them was a man and the other was a woman. I would later find out they were a couple of drug addicts who had been breaking into houses and apartments around the Seattle area. They were also prime suspects in a murder case. The police speculated that they had somehow jimmied the lock on the sliding door. However, I may have accidentally left it unlocked myself, as I had gone swimming earlier that day. I didn't tell my parents about what happened until they got back. I didn't want this incident to ruin their vacation. I always love and respect my parents, but that incident really changed my stance on firearms. Sometimes they are necessary, because there are all kinds of dangers that will lurk in the night. I'm a 35-year-old urban explorer from Arizona. Last year, my 2 friends and I set out on what was supposed to be our most ambitious exploration yet. I'm going to be vague about certain details, and obviously I changed the names of the locations because I don't want to encourage anyone else to try and find this abandoned installation. I will tell you it was in the Nevada desert and doesn't really show up on Google Earth. For the hell of it, I'm going to call my friends Rick and Morty. We drove out into the desert with plenty of water and supplies, half expecting to get lost and never even find the place. Rick had learned about this place through an ex-army buddy of his, who had never been stationed there as it had been abandoned for quite some time, but knew for certain of its existence somehow. He speculated that at one point in time or another, it may have even housed up to 2 nuclear warheads. At first, I was adamantly opposed to exploring anywhere that could potentially have radioactive waste, but Rick's friend assured us there was nothing there that would cause an incident. It was early in the summer, and the days were becoming longer. We left our motel at first light and drove off-road for a couple of hours before, to my surprise, we actually did locate it. There were 3 warehouse-like buildings, each the size of airplane hangars, surrounded by 2 different chain-link fences laced with barbed wire. There were many old and rusty signs, boldly declaring that this was government property and any trespassers would be prosecuted. Morty peered through his binoculars at the installation for about 15 minutes. When he was convinced the facility was completely abandoned, the 3 of us strapped on our gear for our adventure. We all considered ourselves to be survivalists, but each of us had our own unique skills that made us invaluable to our little team here. Rick had the connections to locate sites that practically no one else knew about, in addition to being the technician of sorts. Morty was our old field medic in case of emergencies, and he knew a lot about field botany as well. I was the designated climber. Whenever we visited a site that required accessing high places, I would be the one to forge the path ahead. I'd free climb and hang a line for the other two to follow. I was also the largest of the three of us and was capable of carrying stuff either of the other two would not be able to. I could also carry them in case of a debilitating injury while exploring, knowing that if we were caught, we would be facing anything from a crippling fine to serious jail time. We recorded a video message on a phone to our friends and family, just in case something went wrong. We left it on the back seat of our truck. It was clear that the facility had not been visited by the Army in any professional capacity in quite some time. The fence was damaged and leaning over in several areas, and the locks on the gates had long since broken off. We walked right in without any trouble at all, even sparing a few minutes to check out an old guard shack. The desert sand had covered the grounds everywhere, like a thin layer of dust, and had collected in piles of several inches high in the doorways. We spent about 40 minutes in the first building, which contained offices, bunk rooms, and a garage big enough to easily fit my house in. But aside from the structure itself, there was almost nothing of value to appreciate. There was no furniture, no forgotten classified documents or maps, not even abandoned personal items to pocket. The garage did contain a few old tires and dozens of ancient grease and oil stains scattered around the floor. We were slightly disappointed, but undeterred. We moved on to the second building and broke in using one of our heavy-duty flashlights. The inside was practically a coliseum-sized space, filled with abandoned ladders and scattered metal support beams. We separated and wandered about, keeping each other in sight using our flashlights. We speculated this place may have been used to store vehicles like small tanks or planes at some point. We called each other across the room, causing a satisfying series of echoes. I stayed close to the walls, while Rick and Morty ventured deeper into the room. I noticed a door to an office or closet of some sort against the far wall. Making way for it, I soon discovered it was not a traditional door, but one that had a seal around it like a walk-in freezer. I popped it open and shined my flashlight around inside. I expected it to be extremely hot and uncomfortable inside, containing stuffy air that had been sitting around undisturbed for years on end. I was surprised to feel a slight chill in the air instead, as if the room occasionally experienced a refreshing breeze somehow. The room was about the size of an average two-car garage, but strangely enough, the only thing inside of it was a spiral staircase that appeared to lead downwards. I walked over and looked down into the darkness below. I couldn't make anything out, of course, so I decided to walk down a few steps and see what sort of secret room it might lead to. After walking down about 20 steps, my boots making a tapping sound against the metal stairs, I suddenly got the feeling I had entered an extremely wide-open space. Every footstep seemed to echo into a vast nothingness beyond me. I shined my flashlight around in every direction, but I literally could not see a single thing beyond myself and the staircase. It was like there was this infinite darkness all around me. Figuring there must have been an existing cavern down here, and the army had built a structure on top of it, I continued my descent, losing track of how many steps I had taken. I paused after a moment to listen. I shut the flashlight off and allowed my other senses to take over. I couldn't hear anything over my own breathing. No sound of flowing water or echoes of any kind. The only thing I could really sense was the smell of the old metal staircase. How many stories had I climbed down now? Maybe 5? I fished a nickel out from my pocket and tossed it over the side of the staircase. I then waited in silence. Seconds passed. 8, 10. I didn't hear the sound of it striking against the ground at all. Holy shit, how deep is this thing? A part of me wanted to start heading back up to solid ground and to daylight, but the urban explorer inside me insisted on pressing forward. I turned my flashlight on again and kept walking downwards. It was a good thing I used the light too, because after a dozen or so more steps, the staircase simply ended altogether. The metal bar that ran down the center of the staircase continued downward into the black abyss. I couldn't really tell in this darkness if the stairs had broken off from disrepair or had simply never been completed at all. I sat down on the bottom few steps and let my feet swing off the edge. I spat downwards and tried to follow its progress with my light, but it vanished into the darkness. I whistled to try and get a sense of my surroundings, using the echo as a sort of marker. The way it echoed told me that I was still high up in whatever this room was. It was incredibly eerie. A small voice in my head was pleading with me to head back up now, but the other part of me yearned to learn more. I tried to take a few pictures with my digital camera, but of course they showed absolutely nothing of interest, apart from me sitting in extreme darkness on a metal staircase. I deleted them. My flashlight began to flicker after a moment. That's when I decided it was time to start heading back up. I was curious to see what Rick and Morty thought of all this. I cast my flashlight beam into the darkness, and that's when I thought I saw something for a very brief couple of seconds. I couldn't exactly tell what it was, but it appeared to be something quite large. I sprinted back up the stairs as fast as I could, flashlight in my right hand, the railing on my left. It took me slightly longer than I expected to reach the top, but when I did, I shot out of that sealed freezer door and back into the giant hangar bay area. For a few seconds, I paused to catch my breath. I wondered what exactly I had seen down there. Rick and Morty were nowhere to be seen. I made my way back out through the door we had broken into. I froze in my tracks for a split second. I thought I had lost my mind. The moon was out. How long had I been going down that staircase exactly? I immediately got on the radio and Rick's voice came on, almost immediately screaming at me, wanting to know where the hell I'd been. I told them about the spiral staircase I found. I then asked what time it was, just after 8 p.m. I had been missing for multiple hours. Rick and Morty drove the truck right through the gates and pulled up right next to me. They yelled for me to get in. Then they floored it out of there and back across the desert. They were both beyond panicked. They had spent a large amount of the day looking for me, scouring the surrounding area in all directions. They demanded to know why I hadn't picked up the radio. My head was spinning. I couldn't really find the words to answer their questions. Back at the motel, I told them everything. They reported that they'd also found the strange staircase room and even walked down a few steps. They'd called down and used the radio. Then they went back up. They didn't want to go any further without knowing what was down there. Rick and Morty are convinced I hit my head and had some sort of elaborate dream about how far down the staircase went. But I had no injuries of any kind and wasn't on drugs either. I'd never been in any kind of condition where I'd lost track of time like that. I wish I had saved those photos to prove to them where I was. We've discussed going back there, but I get the sense that I probably shouldn't be walking down those steps again. I feel like I was really pressing my luck. Alright, so this occurred when I was 16, and because of what happened, I would never use social media again. It was getting near the end of the school year, which meant that we would have the summer off in a couple of weeks. It also meant the teachers would let the class have some free time and rarely gave out additional assignments. Anyway, I was in class sitting with my friends, chatting as our teacher gave us free time. We were pretty much talking about all the things girls in the high school would talk about. What we were doing over the summer, college jobs, our cars, even graduation. As one of my friends was talking about how her boss had just fired her from her job, I got a notification from Facebook on my phone. A username I'd never seen before sent me a friend request. Let me be as clear as I can. Getting friend requests from unknown users is no big surprise to me. What I would do is, if I knew the person, I would accept their request and request to be their friend as well. But if I didn't know who they were, I would just accept or decline it based on how I was feeling. I didn't know who this person was, so I just felt like declining him. That's when I received another notification on my phone from Facebook. It was the same username. He had sent me a direct message. It read something along these lines. "Hey, you're really pretty. Would you like to chat with me?" I responded by telling him I had no idea who he was, and apologized as well. Keep in mind, this guy's photo looked to be about 40 years old, and I was 18 at the time. This was starting to become very creepy. My friends eventually wanted to see what I was up to, so I showed them the chat as well. Two of my friends really didn't care, and the other one said to just block him. I decided to just kinda leave it alone. I figured he wouldn't try to message me again anyway. When I got home, I received another notification on my phone from the same guy. He said that we would get to know each other well, and we would start a, quote, romantic relationship soon enough. I was beyond creeped out at this point, so I just blocked him. I thought that would be the end of it. Not even 10 minutes later, though, I received another message on Facebook from a different username. "Why did you block me? I want to get to know you." I told him to leave me alone, and that he was way too old for me, that if he didn't stop I would call the police and report him. He started using profanity and making threats that he was going to find and kill me. I blocked him once again and called the police. Of course, they couldn't do anything, since he didn't really commit a crime according to them. I find that BS, but whatever his account was seemed to be taken down, and even if the police could track him, I couldn't remember his username anyway. About a week or so went by, and I was starting to forget about what happened. Honestly, I just wanted to graduate from high school and be done with all this. A few days later, I was home alone in my room on my computer. That was when I heard it. My dogs barking at something. I went to go see what it was they were barking at. Something outside the sliding glass door, but I couldn't see anything since it was so dark out there. I looked a bit harder and began to make out the figure of someone standing in our yard, looking straight at me. He took off running, and I never saw that figure again. I have no idea whoever that was. Was that the person on Facebook? I don't know, but I believe it very well might have been. I decided to stop using it altogether just to be safe. When I was about 22 years old, I attended a university over 2,000 miles away from my home. I was ready to start a new chapter of my life by studying culinary in college. I wanted to be a chef as a career. I didn't have the money with me at the time to pay for my college, so I had to get a student loan and pay back the money. That meant I had to get a job while I was in college. All of the jobs I had tried looking for either rejected my application or weren't hiring. My university did have jobs on campus, but from what I heard, you don't exactly get paid much. It didn't really seem like I had much a choice, though. so I decided to apply somewhere on campus. I for some reason chose to be a library assistant. Basically, I would scan books and put them where they belonged. It was quite an easy task, but a long one. Anyway, one day the library was empty. As it was getting ready to close, I was finishing up putting a few books away on the shelves when I heard the library doors open. They then closed soon after. I figured it was just a student coming in here to return a book or something. I turned around to see it was not a student at all, but some guy who looked like he didn't even go to this school. He looked homeless, honestly. I told him the library was closed and to come back tomorrow, but he didn't react at all to what I'd told him. He just stood there looking at me. I could see right away that he must be high on something. This man was not right in the head, so I asked him if he needed any help. Finally, he responded, saying no in a very raspy voice. I knew there was something wrong with him, and so I called security. But before I was able to put the phone up to my ear, he rushed over and grabbed me with one of his arms. He used the other arm to take something out of his pocket. I started to freak out and started trying to break free. He was holding onto my arm really tightly. He then gave me the creepiest smile I've ever seen. He held a knife up to my throat, and I started screaming. Thank God there was security nearby. They stormed into the library and threw the man to the ground. They then called the police. When the police arrived, I was questioned, and they took the man off to some mental institution, I think. It's been 3 years since that happened. I just hope the man is getting the help he clearly needs, but that was the scariest experience I've ever had. This happened a few years ago, 6 years to be exact. I was around 10 years old at the time, and my dad and my younger brother, who was 7, all decided to go up to our cabin in Colorado. My parents had built this cabin long before I was born when they lived in Colorado. It was a nice small log cabin. It had a kitchen, a small living room, a bathroom, and even 2 bedrooms as well. When we got to the cabin, we unpacked everything. We hadn't packed much in the first place, as we were only going to be staying for a few nights there. When we unpacked, I went to the room I would be staying in. In the room I was staying in, it had only one window that had a clear view to the forest. My brother would be sleeping with my dad, since he was still at the age where he was scared of the dark or being alone. My dad and brother were going to pick up dinner and would be back in about an hour or so. The cabin was in a rural area, and the nearest pizza shop was about 15 miles away. I really didn't have anything to do other than to just sit around. It was so boring that I was really regretting going on this trip. Yes, there was a TV, but it was not working. And on top of that, there were no movies or TV shows anyway. I also couldn't talk to anyone on the phone because we had no service. Eventually, I just decided to take a short nap. I was awoken to a noise. I woke up wondering what that sound was. It sounded like someone or something was scratching their nails against metal. I looked out my window, but I didn't see anything. Just in case someone was out there, I put the blinds down, but they would only go down halfway. I put some clothes in the remaining space between the blinds. When I was walking through the hallway to enter the living room, I stopped in my tracks. Standing there was a man who was very tall, maybe about 6'4" or something. He didn't seem to have seen me, as he was facing the opposite direction. I had no idea how the man got in, but that didn't matter at the moment. I quietly stepped back into the hallway and went back into my room, which had the only working lock in the place. I shut the door quietly and locked it. I was in my room for a good 5 minutes when I heard footsteps coming toward my bedroom door. I started to panic, trying to find something to use as a weapon. I found an airsoft gun that was painted all black. It was a fake gun, but it still looked convincing enough to scare someone off. At least I hoped so. I held it in my hand tightly. The man started banging on the door very hard, and after the fifth kick to the door, it broke down. When he saw me holding that gun in my hand, though, he made a run for it out the front door. I waited for my dad to get home so I could tell him what happened. He got home and called the cops, but nothing ever came of it. The man simply got away with it, and we never saw him again. A few years ago, my group of friends were having a bonfire during the middle of summer, July to be exact. We were talking about random things that normal teenage boys would talk about. Eventually, one of my friends, who I'll call Jordan, decided we should all tell a scary story. I honestly thought that was a good idea. Our other friends also agreed. Jordan went first and told a story about Bigfoot or something. One of my other friends, named Adam, though, told us a story that really gave us all goosebumps. I can't remember every detail of the story, of course, as Adam told it to us quite a long time ago. I can't personally say whether or not there are some exaggerated details of his story, but it did give us chills in real life. So I figured that's good enough. Now, Adam wanted to tell us a story about how his dad came into contact with a ghost in a hotel. Here it goes. Adam's dad worked as the person who's always sat at the front desk, taking calls and giving visitors their room keys. I can't remember the exact name of the hotel, but supposedly it was very fancy. Adam's dad, who had just recently gotten the job, was told by the hotel janitor about the ghost of a woman named Sally that supposedly haunted the place. Adam's dad didn't believe in the paranormal, so obviously he thought that was bullshit. One day he got a call at the front desk from room 215. He answered the phone saying, "Hello, how may I assist you?" There was no response. The person on the other end was silent. After saying hello a few more times, he hung up, but not even a minute later, the phone rang again from room 215. He said hello again, and this time he could hear someone's voice on the other end. It sounded like a woman's voice. She whispered something along the lines of, "Help! I need help!" Before he could even respond, the person hung up. Immediately, Adam spoke with the manager of the hotel, explaining the situation about the woman and room 215. The manager had this confused look on his face. He said that no one had been checked into that room in weeks. Both of them went up to room 215. They opened the door and went inside, but they didn't find anyone there. In fact, everything was completely organized and looked as if no one had been there in quite a long time. The manager told him that maybe it was just one of the hotel staff playing a prank or something, but after what Adam's dad had been told about Sally, he was convinced he was talking to her ghost over the phone. When I was 15, I went into town for my first day doing some charity work. I was a bit early, so I sat on a bench in the town center for a bit. Someone approached me, introduced himself, and said he'd just moved here. I briefly introduced myself as well, and we talked a bit about some local stuff. He mentioned he was 26, which weirded me out a bit. He was on his phone, and suddenly I heard the shutter sound as it faced me. I freaked out and demanded to know why he was taking pictures of me. He denied it and claimed he was taking photos of the scenery, despite there being nothing around us. Annoyed and creeped out, I left with no explanation. I went to the charity shop, where I spent the next 6 hours working. So 6 hours later, I left the shop and started heading home. Suddenly, I heard my name being shouted from behind me. It was that same guy again. I said to leave me alone, but he refused to listen and said he wouldn't let me go home alone. I was yelling at him, telling him to go away, and I started to move quicker. He chased after me. In the end, I ended up running for my life until I eventually lost him and made it home safely. I never saw that guy around town again.